Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Our topic today is a period of such phenomenal, almost invisible transformation that if you blink, you miss it. Early childhood. We were talking about ages 2 to 6, roughly.
Yeah, exactly. This is the time when, a high chair resident somehow morphs into this complex, conversational little human being. We've pulled together a stack of, well, pretty dense research physiology, neuroscience, public health, safety policy, the works, and we're trying to extract the really critical nuggets of biosocial change that define this era. Our mission really is to turn the scientific blueprint of development into useful, actionable knowledge for you.
Absolutely. This deep dive is going to try and clarify the science behind that sudden jump in speed and dexterity you see in a child. We'll cover everything from, why 5-year-olds think so much faster than 3-year-olds to really complex, almost contradictory relationship between family income and nutritional health.
We'll definitely explore the astonishing mechanism that insulates the brain's circuitry for speed, that's myelination, and we'll spend significant time on a crucial, maybe slightly alarming study that connected chronic stress in low-income settings to, well, measurable deficits in memory formation. It's quite something.
And finally, we're going to finish by analyzing the powerful effectiveness of public policy against environmental dangers. We'll show how the 3 levels of prevention, primary, secondary, and tertiary, are really the framework that keeps these rapidly developing minds and bodies safe. It's a foundational topic, so let's jump straight in. Let's start with the changing blueprint of their physical form, growth and nutrition first.
Okay.
Section 1, the changing blueprint, physical growth and nutrition.
Right. So when you look at children across this age span, say from 2 to 6, the transformation in their actual physical form is pretty striking. That sort of chubby, top-heavy toddler look, it gives way to a slimmer, more streamlined young child.
And why is that? Is it just baby fat burning off?
Well, partly, but the main visual change happens because the lower body lengthens significantly. Their legs grow faster than their torso, which changes their center of gravity. And that helps improve their balance and coordination quite a bit.
Okay, that makes sense. And the actual pace of growth, it slows down from infancy, right?
It does slow down, yeah. It's no longer that explosive surge you see in the first year or two.
Yeah.
But it's steady. Our research gives us pretty precise numbers for well-nourished kids in this 2 to 6 window. They add almost 3 inches in height and gain about 4.5 pounds in weight each year.
Each year. That's quite consistent.
That consistency is really key. It lets all the body systems, muscles, respiratory system, bones, it lets them stabilize and strengthen in parallel with the neurological growth we'll get to later. It all works together.
And here's something I found fascinating, especially with all the current concern about weight. The BMI data. We found that the body mass index, BMI, is actually lower at ages 5 and 6 than at any other time in life.
That's right. It's a critical developmental marker. Sometimes it's called the BMI dip or the adiposity rebound. It basically signals that the child has effectively, well, stretched out.
Stretched out.
Yeah, they're in a naturally leaner phase because they're growing taller faster than they're putting on muscle or fat mass. And understanding this natural leanness is really important context when we start talking about nutrition and obesity concerns. It shows the typical child's body during this specific phase is kind of designed to be highly active and relatively thin.
Right, but then we immediately hit this paradox, especially in developed nations. You see pictures of food everywhere, endless choices. Yet our sources highlight this major split. Most kids get more than enough calories. Calorie sufficiency isn't usually the problem.
Exactly. But the nutrition is often poor. We're dealing with nutrient deficiency that's sort of hidden under this blanket of calorie excess. Kids are consuming calories, sure, but often they're empty calories. They fill them up, but they don't provide the essential vitamins, minerals, micronutrients needed for, well, optimal brain and body development.
And the main culprit pointed out in the research, sugar. Unhealthy sugar consumption.
Yes. And what's really disheartening is that this isn't just about individual choices, kids wanting sweets. It's often reinforced by social norms, by customs. Think about birthday parties, school rewards, those convenient processed snacks.
Oh yeah, they're everywhere. And designed to appeal to kids' taste and parents' need for convenience.
Precisely. That cultural acceptance of high sugar intake makes shifting dietary habits incredibly difficult for families.
And on top of that, we have Food allergies complicating things.
We do. For what, an estimated 3 to 8% of children, their diet isn't just about choice or habit, it's a matter of daily, potentially life-threatening risk. Allergies to specific foods add this whole layer of vigilance and stress for families that's really specific to this period and environment.
Okay, so stepping back to the bigger picture. Childhood obesity. The sources are pretty clear. It's classified as one of the most serious public health challenges of our time. And it's framed not just as weight, but fundamentally as a symptom of poor nutrition, right? An energy imbalance.
That's the crucial framing. It's a sign something's wrong with the quality of the diet, not just the quantity. And here's where the discussion needs real depth, particularly around the socioeconomic link. This is critical. Our sources talk about something sometimes called the double burden of malnutrition.
It's a double burden.
Yeah. You see this stark correlation. As family income decreases, both malnutrition, meaning nutrient deficiency, and obesity increase at the same time.
Wait, hang on. Both. How does low income lead to both malnutrition and obesity? That sounds completely counterintuitive.
It absolutely sounds counterintuitive. You think poverty just means not having enough food, full stop. But that's too simple. That's why this finding is so important for, say, policymakers. It's not about simple scarcity. It's about access to quality food.
Okay, so explain that link.
Well, low-income families often live in what are called food deserts, places where high-quality, fresh fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, they're either physically unavailable or just prohibitively expensive. They're effectively priced out of the nutrient-dense options.
So to make the budget work, they rely on cheaper, energy-dense foods.
Yeah.
Processed stuff, fats, sugars.
Exactly. Foods that give you a lot of calories per dollar. This takes care of the immediate hunger, the calorie sufficiency part, but it virtually guarantees nutrient deficiency. And because of the high calories and poor nutritional profile, it leads to rapid weight gain. Obesity.
So they end up simultaneously over-caloried and undernourished.
Wow, that's the double burden. And it gets even more complex because chronic financial stress itself can impact metabolism, hormonal balance. It often leads people to rely more on those high palatability, comforting foods, which just makes the obesity risk even worse. It's a really complex societal challenge. It needs infrastructure solutions, economic solutions, not just telling people to eat better.
And this whole problem is made worse by a perception issue, right? The sources mentioned parents often don't see the overweight issue.
That's a major hurdle. Parents of overweight children frequently underestimate their child's weight. They see them as solid or sturdy, maybe comparing them to other kids in an environment where overweight is becoming normalized. And if the main caregiver doesn't recognize it as a health issue, then seeking help, sticking with interventions from doctors or nutrition programs, it becomes really hard to even start, let alone sustain.
But it's not all bleak. There are some positive trends mentioned.
Yes, thankfully. The public health sector isn't standing still. The research does note some improvements, specifically improvements in young children's diets and the kinds of activities offered in high-quality daycare settings. These institutional environments, when they're well-regulated and health-focused, can actually successfully counteract some of the negative trends seen elsewhere. It shows that systemic change, like improving daycare standards, can make a difference.
Okay, that's important context. Let's transition now. Section 2. The incredible brain engine size, speed, and control. We've talked about the growing body, but the neurological acceleration happening between 2 and 6. That feels like the real headline here.
Oh, absolutely. This is really the era of maximum neuronal development, you could say. We're moving from just physical shape to the dynamic, constantly changing circuitry that runs everything: thought, emotion, movement.
The sheer size milestones are incredible. By age 2, a child's brain is already 75% of its adult weight.
75%. It's staggering. 3/4 of the physical structure is basically there before most kids can reliably use the toilet.
Amazing. But size isn't the whole story, you're saying. Speed is key.
Speed is the game changer. The single primary reason for faster, more complex thinking and quicker reactions during early childhood is new and extensive myelination.
Myelination, okay, that's the term we need to unpack. It's the insulation, right? Explain how that works. How does that chemical process translate into the speed difference a parent actually sees between, say, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old?
Great question, because the effect you see is dramatic. Myelin is this fatty substance, and it coats the axons. Axons are the long, thin projections that neurons use to send electrical signals to each other. Think of them as the brain's internal wiring.
Like tiny electrical wires.
Exactly. And without myelin, those signals are relatively slow, a bit leaky, inefficient, like trying to send electricity through an uninsulated wire in the rain. You lose power. Myelin wraps around those axons, acting like insulation on a wire. It speeds up the signal transmission dramatically, sometimes by a factor of 100 or more, and makes it much more efficient.
Wow.
And this process, myelination, happens gradually but extensively throughout early childhood. It's not instant, it's a building process. So the effect. A 2-year-old might struggle to coordinate 2 actions at once, like running and trying to catch a ball. Their processing is just too slow. But a 5-year-old, thanks to much more myelination, can see the ball coming, process its speed, figure out where it's going, move their body into position, and coordinate their hands to catch it all in a split second.
So that gradual increase in myelin is what really separates the often clumsy reactive 3-year-old from the quicker, more coordinated 5-year-old. It's not just practice.
It's not just practice, though. Practice helps solidify the pathways. It's the physical upgrade. It's the fatty insulation speeding up the whole command center.
Got it. So as things speed up within the brain circuits, you also need better communication between the different parts,
Yes.
right? Especially the two halves.
Precisely. As processing gets faster, you need better integration. And that job falls mainly to the corpus callosum. The sources define it as this long, thick band of nerve fibers, millions of them acting as a massive communication bridge. It connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain. It's the superhighway between the two sides.
And this brings us to lateralization, the idea that each side of the brain specializes in different things. We all know the classic examples. Left side often handles the right side of the body, language production, logical stuff. Right side handles left body, creativity, spatial skills, reading emotions.
Yes, those functional specializations definitely exist. But, and this is important, we need to immediately tackle the popular myth of being left-brained or right-brained. Contemporary neuroscience, as our sources highlight, really stresses that this distinction is often, well, highly exaggerated. It's more myth than reality in healthy people.
Okay, that makes sense. Our audience expects that kind of nuance.
Yeah.
Why do you think the pop psychology myth persists so strongly then? And what is the real interplay the corpus callosum allows?
Well, the myth persists because it's simple, right? It's an easy way to categorize people. But the reality is far more integrated. In healthy, normally functioning people, there's no exclusive-sidedness. Both sides of the brain are involved in almost every skill. Take language, for example. The left hemisphere might process the literal words you hear.
The vocabulary, grammar.
Right. But the right hemisphere processes the tone of voice, the emotional context, whether there's sarcasm or humor involved. Without the corpus callosum instantly integrating that information from both sides, conversation would be purely literal. Imagine trying to understand jokes or social cues. It would be functionally useless for real interaction.
So specialization exists, but the action, the output, is fully integrated thanks to that bridge.
Fully integrated. And because we're talking about early childhood, this brain is also incredibly flexible. Plasticity is huge. The brain is still very malleable. If one specific area gets damaged early on, other areas can often reorganize and take over that function much more effectively than they could later in life. The corpus callosum, as it gets thicker and more myelinated throughout early childhood, ensures that this integration and flexibility is really robust during these crucial foundation-laying years.
Okay, so we have speed, we have integration. Where does this all lead in terms of higher level function, executive function?
Exactly. All this improved speed and connectivity is basically paving the way for better executive function, which is primarily governed by the prefrontal cortex, or PFC. That's the part of the cortex right behind your forehead.
And this seems to be where you see the most dramatic behavioral difference between a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. The research clearly shows that between ages 2 and 6, neurological growth is especially strong in these PFC areas, responsible for planning, thinking, social awareness, language, basically gaining control.
Yes, the maturation of the PFC directly shapes the child's social and emotional world. As it develops, their social understanding gets better. They become better at reading social cues, understanding turn-taking, seeing things from another's perspective, though that's still developing. And critically, emotional control improves. The brain is literally installing better software for managing internal feelings and impulses.
And the classic sign of an immature PFC is that lack of regulation. Impulsiveness is the obvious one. But you also mentioned its cousin, perseveration.
Right. Impulsiveness is acting without thinking, the inability to stop an action. Perseveration is kind of the opposite problem, but related. It's the tendency to get stuck on one thought or activity, even when it's no longer appropriate or when the situation demands you shift gears.
So, when my nephew insists on wearing his superhero cape everywhere, even to bed, or has a total meltdown because the TV show ended, that's not just being stubborn. That's partly his PFC struggling.
That's a perfect example of the neurological reality. The frontal lobe's job includes interrupting ongoing actions, regulating emotions tied to them, and shifting focus flexibly. An immature PFC creates that bottleneck. They literally can't switch gears easily sometimes. And this neurological immaturity has a huge life or death safety implication. It's a major reason adults must be responsible for preventing childhood injury.
Because the child is mobile, curious, exploring.
Exactly. They have the physical ability to get into trouble, but their brain lacks the consistent wiring for accurate, long-range hazard assessment or reliable impulse control.
That makes the next point incredibly important. The brain's vulnerability to stress.
Yes, the early brain is powerful and flexible, but it's also exquisitely sensitive to the environment, especially chronic stress. Our sources emphasize that the relationship between stress and brain activity is complex. It depends on the child's age, the type of stress, the degree of stress.
And the caregiver's role is crucial in buffering that stress.
Absolutely critical. The caregiver needs to provide a balanced response, enough arousal to signal potential danger when appropriate, but coupled with immediate, reliable reassurance to help the child's system calm down. And that requires the adult's brain to be well regulated, needing speedy coordination between their own PFC and limbic system to manage the child's response effectively. It's a demanding job.
Now let's get into that specific study you mentioned earlier, the one involving low SES families during COVID-19 restrictions. That finding about brain reactivity sounds really concerning.
It was concerning and also counterintuitive. Researchers often expect chronic stress to lead to a hyperreactive stress response system, constantly high cortisol, easily triggered. But what they found in this specific highly stressed group of children was the opposite. Their brains were actually less reactive to acute stressors introduced in the lab setting.
Less reactive.
Yeah.
Why would that be? Was the system just burned out?
The leading hypothesis is that the brain, facing chronic, high-level, inescapable stress, had adapted by learning to sort of shut down or dampen its physiological response. Think of it maybe as a protective mechanism in the short term, trying to conserve resources or avoid being constantly overwhelmed by alarm signals that, in their difficult environment, they couldn't do anything about anyway. But it's ultimately damaging.
A kind of learned helplessness at the neurological level.
Something like that, desensitization. But this shutdown response came at a significant cognitive cost.
Which was?
The sources clearly state that in this group, the reduced levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, which in healthy situations helps manage the stress response, and then decline actually correlated with reduced memory function. It seems the chronic stress dulled the very systems, perhaps involving the hippocampus, that are essential for forming new memories. So the adaptation meant to cope with the overwhelming present ended up potentially impairing their ability to learn and remember for the future.
That's profound. It's a stark reminder that things like socioeconomic instability and chronic stress aren't just abstract concepts. They get physically wired into a child's developing brain architecture.
Absolutely. It underscores the deep link between biosocial factors.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Section 3. Skills in motion mastering the body. We've explored the brain's internal changes. Now, how does this manifest outwardly in terms of physical skills?
Right. This is where you see the payoff of all that neurological development, the rapid mastery of motor skills that lets kids physically explore and interact with their world.
Let's start with gross motor skills, the big movement. Running, jumping, climbing stairs without holding on, throwing a ball.
These skills seem to emerge almost magically sometimes, but they aren't automatic. They become possible because three things align: brain maturation, the myelination, the PFC development, the coordination we talked about.
Okay, brain readiness.
Then, motivation. The child has an intrinsic drive to move, explore, and master their body. And finally, guided practice. The neurological pathways for balance, muscle coordination, sequencing movements, they have to be used repeatedly to become smooth and efficient. That's why simply hopping on one foot is actually a complex neurological feat.
And the environment plays a big role here too, doesn't it? Culture, where they live.
A huge role. The sources really stress the influence of culture, urbanization, and locale. The environment dictates the opportunities for practice. A child growing up where active outdoor play is the norm will likely develop different kinds of physical confidence and dexterity than a child, say, in a dense urban area with limited safe spaces to run and climb. Urbanization can sometimes restrict the variety of movements practiced, which affects how well those skills get integrated. The body learns based on what the environment lets it do.
Okay, so that's gross motor. What about fine motor skills, the small, precise stuff?
Right. Fine motor skills involve the small muscles, usually in the hands and fingers. We're talking about drawing recognizable shapes, buttoning a shirt, using utensils properly, cutting with scissors, working with small Legos or puzzle pieces.
And these are generally harder to master.
Yes, significantly harder. They demand incredible precision and the synchronization of many tiny muscle groups. It's an act of intricate control that requires more focus, more sustained attention than just running across a yard.
And this is where that brain integration, the bilateral involvement, really comes into play again, the corpus callosum being essential.
Absolutely. Many fine motor tasks require the two hands, and thus the two brain hemispheres, to work together seamlessly. Think about stabilizing paper with one hand while drawing with the other. Or using scissors, one hand guides the paper, the other manipulates the scissors. The speed and quality of communication across that corpus callosum directly impacts how fluidly and successfully a child can perform these tasks.
And there's a documented gender difference here, on average.
There is. While individual variation is huge, of course, the research consistently finds that, on average, fine motor skills mature about 6 months earlier in females than in males during this early childhood period.
Interesting. Okay, so we have kids who are becoming much more physically capable, faster thinkers, but still have that immature prefrontal cortex, which leads us directly into safety concerns. Section 4, the critical need for safety, injury control, and prevention.
Exactly. This combination, growing physical ability, intense curiosity, and still developing impulse control and risk assessment, creates a perfect storm. It means that without constant adult vigilance and, crucially, structural safeguards built into the environment, the primary danger to a young child is often accidental injury. Safety has to be paramount.
And the statistics bear that out pretty grimly.
They do. It's a sobering fact, but in every nation, more young children die from accidents, avoidable injuries than from any other single specific cause. More than diseases, more than anything else.
And the U.S. data shows this specific age group, 2 to 6, is particularly vulnerable, more so than slightly older kids.
Yes, they've hit this peak of exploratory drive and mobility, but their ability to consistently predict danger or inhibit a risky impulse is still severely limited by that developing PFC. They don't reliably connect actions to potential consequences yet.
So what are the main dangers we need to be aware of for this age group?
The sources list the most common causes of severe harm or death. Falls are a big one. Motor vehicle incidents, poisoning from medications, cleaning supplies, fire, and drowning.
These sound like predictable risks, which means they should be preventable.
Exactly. And the strategy is injury control or harm reduction. This approach accepts that children will act impulsively sometimes, so instead of just relying on telling them be careful, we have to design their environment to minimize the consequences if they do act impulsively.
Give us concrete examples of that harm reduction in practice.
We're talking about things that have become standard, often legally required. Safety surfaces under playground equipment to cushion falls. Mandatory use of appropriate car seats and booster seats, bike helmets, child-proof caps and containers for medicines and chemicals, fences around pools, constant supervision near water.
These are individual measures, but you mentioned needing an ecological approach, the 3 levels of prevention.
Right. To really make a difference, especially at a population level, we need to think beyond just individual products or behaviors. We need to address the whole system surrounding the child. This framework uses 3 levels.
Okay, what's the first level?
Primary prevention. This is the broadest level, operating way upstream. It focuses on the macro system, the exosystem, the larger societal and community structures. The goal here is to prevent the harm from ever having a chance to occur in the first place.
That sounds ambitious. What does primary prevention look like in reality? How do you prevent accidents at that scale?
It targets the root causes, the systemic risk factors. We're talking about policies and community efforts that ensure stable neighborhoods, promote family cohesion through things like affordable childcare and parental leave, actively work to decrease financial instability, reduce family isolation, and provide support for young parents, like preventing teenage parenthood. If a community provides safe housing, economic stability, accessible healthcare, and strong social supports, the baseline risk for all sorts of negative outcomes, including accidental injury and maltreatment, goes down across the board. The danger is reduced before the child even encounters it.
Okay, that's primary. What's secondary prevention?
Secondary prevention is more focused on intervention. It's about identifying situations or individuals that are high risk and stepping in early to prevent harm before it actually happens or escalates.
Like screening.
Exactly. A good example is screening for things like postpartum depression in new mothers, or identifying insecure attachment between a caregiver and child early on. If professionals spot a potentially problematic dynamic, early intervention programs like home visiting or parenting support classes can be deployed to strengthen the parent-child relationship and provide resources, preventing the situation from deteriorating into neglect or abuse later. It's early detection and timely support.
And the third level, tertiary prevention.
Tertiary prevention comes into play after an injury or maltreatment has already occurred. The focus here is on limiting the damage, preventing long-term consequences, and stopping it from happening again.
So this is like emergency response.
Yes, that's a big part of it. High-quality emergency medical care is crucial. The concept of the golden hour after a serious injury is vital for minimizing long-term physical and neurological damage, especially for a developing brain. It also includes interventions after maltreatment, like therapy for the child and family, or removing the child from a dangerous situation to prevent further harm. It's the safety net designed to catch those who fall through the primary and secondary layers and to minimize the lifelong impact.
Let's look at a concrete example of prevention working. The fight against lead poisoning seems like a major public health success story, particularly for primary prevention.
It's a classic, powerful example. High lead levels in a child's blood are devastating. Lead mimics calcium, gets into the bones and brain, and severely disrupts neurological development, including interfering with that crucial myelination process. The sources use the term toxic shrinkage to describe the outcome.
Toxic shrinkage, that sounds awful.
It is. It refers to the reduced brain volume observed in adults who had significant lead exposure as children. There was chilling visual evidence presented in the research, a composite image made from scans of 157 adult brains with histories of childhood lead exposure. Compared to healthy brains, you could literally see areas with reduced volume shown as red and yellow hotspots. Permanent physical loss of brain matter caused by an environmental toxin.
But we fought back against lead successfully.
Hugely successfully. And the key was primary prevention through policy change. The sources talk about a dramatic improvement in a decade. This wasn't achieved by just telling parents to repaint old houses carefully. It was achieved when legislators finally accepted the overwhelming scientific evidence about the damage from lead in paint, lead in gasoline emissions, lead leaching from old water pipes.
So they took systemic action.
They did. We saw the systematic phase-out of leaded gasoline mandated by the EPA starting in the 70s and 80s. We saw the ban on lead-based paint for residential use. These actions removed the primary sources of lead from the child's everyday environment. They stopped breathing it in from car exhaust, stopped ingesting paint chips or dust.
And the result?
The result was profound and relatively rapid. Within about a decade, the rates of childhood lead poisoning plummeted. It became exceedingly rare for children in the U.S. to suffer severe intellectual disability or die from lead poisoning, which used to happen. It stands as definitive proof that targeted, science-based, policy-driven primary prevention is incredibly effective at protecting the health of an entire generation. You change the environment, you protect the child.
Powerful lesson. Okay, this leads us into a related but distinct area, intentional harm. Section 5, understanding and addressing child maltreatment.
Right. When prevention at any level fails and harm occurs, particularly intentional or negligent harm, society has a responsibility to intervene. And to do that effectively, we need clear definitions.
Let's start with the umbrella term, child maltreatment.
Our sources define child maltreatment as any intentional harm to or avoidable endangerment of anyone under 18. It covers all types of harm.
And under that umbrella, you have abuse and neglect.
Correct. Child abuse specifically refers to a deliberate action, an act of commission that harms a child physically, emotionally, or sexually. There's an active, harmful behavior involved.
Whereas child neglect is more about inaction.
Exactly. Child neglect is the failure to meet a child's basic needs, physical needs like food, shelter, hygiene, medical care, or essential educational or emotional needs. It's typically an act of omission, a failure to provide necessary care or supervision.
And there's an important distinction in the data between reported and substantiated maltreatment.
Yes, very important. Reported maltreatment means someone suspected harm and notified the authorities, like Child Protective Services. Substantiated maltreatment means that report was investigated, and the authorities gathered enough evidence to verify that maltreatment did indeed occur. Only substantiated cases are officially counted in most statistics, which means the true numbers are likely higher.
Looking at those substantiated numbers, the trends are interesting.
Yeah.
Reports went up from the 50s to the 90s, but then decreased after that.
That's the general trend, yes. The increase up to the 90s likely reflects growing awareness, mandatory reporting laws taking effect, and better systems for tracking. The decrease since then seems like good news.
Seems like. What's the catch?
The catch is what decreased. The decline was primarily in physical and sexual abuse. Those overt acts of commission went down. This suggests that maybe increased awareness, professional training, and interventions were effective at identifying and perhaps deterring those specific types of harm.
But
the sources are starkly clear. Neglect did not show the same decline. The failure to meet basic needs has remained a much more persistent, intractable problem.
why the difference? Why would abuse go down but neglect stay stubbornly high?
It likely goes back to the roots of the problems. Neglect is often deeply intertwined with those primary prevention failures. We talked about systemic issues like poverty, lack of affordable housing, inadequate access to healthcare and mental health services, substance abuse issues often linked to despair. While abuse can happen across all socioeconomic levels, severe neglect is overwhelmingly concentrated among families facing extreme adversity and lack of resources. If a parent is struggling with homelessness, untreated mental illness, or deep poverty, their failure to provide might stem more from overwhelming external constraints than from malice.
So, because we haven't solved those bigger societal problems, poverty, housing, healthcare access, the underlying conditions that breed neglect haven't really changed, keeping the rates high.
That's a very strong hypothesis supported by the data. Other factors might contribute to the abuse decline, like smaller family sizes or changes in professional scrutiny. But we also have to remember a huge caveat for all this data: underreporting. Most maltreatment happens early in life, often before kids can speak up. Children rarely report their own abuse or neglect. So the official numbers, especially for neglect, which can be less visible than overt injuries, are almost certainly an undercount.
That makes recognizing the signs even more critical for everyone: teachers, doctors, neighbors, family members. What are the specific signs professionals look for? These seem crucial for secondary prevention, for intervening early.
Absolutely. They fall into a few categories. Physically, look for injuries that seem unlikely to be accidents. Things like bruises on both sides of the face or body. Kids usually fall on one side. Burns with a very clear line, like an immersion burn from hot water, or shaped like an object, like an iron or cigarette. Repeated injuries are a huge red flag, especially multiple broken bones seen on x-rays over time, perhaps improperly healed. And just overall slow physical growth, sometimes called failure to thrive, can indicate chronic nutritional neglect.
Okay, those are physical. What about behavioral or emotional signs?
These often reflect the trauma the child is experiencing. You might see fantasy play that is dominated by unusually violent or sexual themes, suggesting the child is trying to process things they've been exposed to. Withdrawal is common, a reluctance to talk, play, or even move much. Their development might seem generally slow or delayed. Socially, you might see a child with no close friendships, or one who is excessively hostile towards others, perhaps bullying smaller children.
And hypervigilance.
Yes, hypervigilance is a key sign of living in constant fear. The child seems perpetually on edge, cringing easily, startling at loud noises, maybe quick to hit or defend themselves. They're scanning for danger constantly. And perhaps the most telling sign is a pervasive fearfulness of their caregiver. Instead of seeking comfort from them, they seem wary or scared. That's a major indicator something is wrong in that core relationship.
Are there environmental signs too?
Yes, instability in the environment is a risk factor and can be a sign. Frequent absences from school without good reason, frequent moves, maybe due to evictions or unstable housing, frequent changes in who is taking care of the child. When the basic structure of their life is constantly shifting and unpredictable, that in itself can constitute neglect and definitely exacerbates other risk factors.
The consequences of maltreatment, when it does happen, are described as devastating and long-lasting. Why is the impact so profound?
Because it happens during that critical period of brain development and attachment formation. Maltreatment fundamentally alters the developing brain's stress response systems and disrupts their ability to form secure, trusting relationships. Children who are mistreated or neglected often grow up learning to view the world and other people as hostile, unpredictable, or exploitative. They miss out on learning the basic trust that's foundational for healthy social development.
And this leads to long-term problems.
Absolutely. Research consistently finds that survivors of childhood maltreatment tend to be less friendly, more prone to aggression, and more socially isolated than their peers. They experience greater social deficits that often cascade into difficulties in school, trouble holding jobs later in life, higher rates of mental health problems, substance abuse, and challenges forming healthy relationships and families of their own.
And there's an economic cost, too.
A massive, enduring economic cost to society. Think about the long-term need for social services, specialized health care for physical and mental health issues, increased involvement in the juvenile and adult justice systems. It adds up to billions of dollars over the lifetimes of survivors. Investing in prevention is not just humane, it's fiscally responsible.
So when maltreatment is substantiated, the focus shifts to tertiary prevention, limiting the harm, and finding a safe, stable place for the child. What does that involve?
It involves careful permanency planning. The goal is to find a safe, stable, lasting home environment for the child as quickly as possible. Options include intensive family preservation services if it's safe for the child to remain home with support, temporary foster care, kinship care, which is placement with a relative, and ideally adoption into a new permanent family.
Adoption is often seen as the best outcome for permanency.
Yes, for children who cannot safely return to their biological parents, adoption is generally considered the best permanency plan because it provides the greatest legal and emotional security and stability. However, there are significant challenges and barriers that often hinder adoption and keep kids waiting in temporary care.
What are those main barriers slowing things down?
Well, first, there are often significant legal delays. Biological parents may be unwilling or unable to relinquish their parental rights, and the court process to terminate those rights can be incredibly lengthy. This leaves children lingering in the uncertainty of foster care, sometimes for years, during those critical early developmental windows.
That limbo must be so damaging.
It really is. Second, there's a strong preference among many prospective adoptive families for infants. Older children, including those in this 2 to 6 age range we're discussing, often wait much longer for an adoptive placement, if they find one at all.
And biases in the system itself.
Yeah. Yes, unfortunately. Our sources mention that some agencies or jurisdictions still screen out potentially wonderful adoptive families who aren't headed by heterosexual couples, which unnecessarily shrinks the pool of available homes. There can also sometimes be a professional preference, perhaps well-intentioned, to try and match the child and adoptive parents based on ethnicity or religion. While cultural connection is important, if this becomes too rigid a requirement, it can severely limit the options for some children, especially those from minority backgrounds, again leading to delays in finding a permanent home.
So overcoming these systemic barriers, the legal delays, the age preference, the screening biases, is crucial for making tertiary prevention truly effective and giving these kids the stability they desperately need.
Absolutely essential.
Okay, let's try to synthesize all of this. This has been a really critical deep dive into ages 2 to 6, mapping this incredible pace of change. We started with a physical transformation, seeing how kids slim down, that surprising BMI dip, and then grappling with that complex double burden of malnutrition and obesity, often driven by socioeconomic factors.
Yeah, then we moved into the brain, which is really the engine of this whole phase. We talked about the speed boost from myelination, the crucial integration work of the corpus callosum connecting the two hemispheres, and how that popular left brain, right brain idea is mostly a myth. We saw the vital role of the maturing prefrontal cortex in gaining impulse control and focus, but also its vulnerability, highlighted by that concerning neurological adaptation, the shutdown response seen in kids under chronic stress.
And we connected that neurological immaturity directly to safety, explaining why accidents are the leading cause of death and why harm reduction is so vital. We detail the power of thinking ecologically about safety through primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention, using the lead poisoning success story as a prime example of effective primary prevention.
And our final synthesis really shows how tightly interwoven everything is in early childhood. Physical growth, neurological maturity, motor skills, emotional regulation, safety, it's all interdependent. This makes it a period of, yes, maximum biological vulnerability if things go wrong, but also maximum plasticity and potential for learning and positive development if the conditions are right.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. Given that remarkable flexibility of the young brain we discussed, And the stark fact that neglect, that failure to meet basic needs, often tied to poverty and lack of support, has not declined like overt abuse has.
And remembering the huge success of the LEAD policies, which tackled the problem at its environmental source. If we apply that same primary prevention logic to the persistent problem of neglect, what specific, measurable, systemic societal changes would truly qualify? We're thinking beyond individual parenting classes or food banks, important as they are. What macro-level actions, like ensuring financial stability for all families, guaranteeing safe and affordable housing, universal access to quality childcare and healthcare? What policies would actually change the environment enough to significantly reduce neglect? How do those broad concepts we mentioned, stable neighborhoods, financial stability, translate into concrete public action needed to secure the biosocial health of every single child from the start?
Something to think about. Thanks for diving in with us.